So first, let me start off apologizing for not being here in person. Um, my name is Bill Tucker. I'm based at the University of Western Cape in South Africa. I've been here for 20 years. Recording this in my office here in Cape Town. Um, but tomorrow I'm off to Indonesia to attend a conference, another conference, the IFIT Working Group 9.4 Social Implications for Computers in Indonesia. And I obviously can't be in both places at once. And I've got a paper and a workshop there. And so I'm recording this in absentia. Again, I apologize. Susan asked me to give a brief overview of Africa and the digital divide, and I'll do my best. Most of the hard data in this short presentation talk comes from a draft brief I got from Russell Southwood of Balancing Act. I really liked it. He sent it to me to have a look. And of course, I'll combine some of this with my own opinions that I'd like to share with you. So the main topic being all these digital divides. I think there's digital divides all over the place. Between Africa and of course Europe and the Americas and elsewhere, and then often also within Africa itself, sub-Saharan Africa. South Africa is a bit of an exception country, and Africa, as are the other powerhouses in Africa. But it's also the same within any African country, and you take your pick. There's a lot of them. You're going to find a plethora of divides all over the place. Of course, a lot of it's geographic. War-torn countries are separated geographically. Landlocked countries are going to suffer, but it's also a lot of informal settlements inside cities, separating, disparities between them and more urban, and there's the urban versus rural divides as well, and of course, if you've got wealthy coastal areas versus the inland. So there's a lot of geographic divides. But basically, digital disparities are products of all kinds of other disparities, and we'll come back to this in a minute. I think it's easy to fall back on a deficit view or a deficit model for Africa and look at all the things that it doesn't have. Over time, though, I think it's more productive to look at an asset model and look at things that people actually do have and the things that people are doing, and finding ways to use ICT to amplify these things, and come back to that as well. But first, let me get across some numbers. And again, I pulled these mostly from Russell's brief paper. So he did, Balancing Act's got a lot of data of national surveys, which of course are going to be outdated and compatible, and you have to fill in the blanks. But basically, he's kind of massaged this, and I've kind of looked at it just to pick a few examples. So there was a survey in 2016, at least the data is kind of recent, that 40.6% of South Africans listen to radio on their mobile phones. So we find mobile phones really, permeating a lot of what's going on the continent. But let's have a look at TV, radio, and internet. So another survey in 2016 found that in the Ivory Coast, 90.5% watch TV at least once a day, 58.7% listen to radio, and only 17% had access to internet. And compare that to a place like South Sudan, where 34% had listened to a radio, only 10% had watched TV, and only 1% had used internet. Some more numbers. So we're looking at the percentage of people that have a phone, listen to radio, watch TV, have internet, and then those numbers we kind of subtract from 100 to get an idea of the media deficit of people that just don't have access to media at all. So in Nigeria, 83% have a phone, 83% listen to radio, 75% watch TV, 23% have access to internet. And in South Africa, so here we're looking at a couple of the African powerhouse countries, 88% have a phone, 88% listen to radio, 85% watch TV, and 27% use the internet. So in Nigeria, we're looking at a media deficit of about 20%, and in South Africa, 10 to 15. And of course, these are big averages from collected from nationwide surveys. It's going to be worse in rural areas than urban areas. So just looking at across Africa, in Senegal, a media deficit of 10 to 13%, don't have access to any media. In Ghana, 12 to 24%. Tanzania, 9 to 48%. South Sudan, 49 to 81%. Somalia, 16 to 28. Uganda, 15 to 37. So we're looking at media deficit across the continent, a quite large percentage. So what I keep coming back to is this concept of amplification potential of ICT. This comes from a guy named Kentaro Toyama. You can read his latest book, Geek Heresy. It really portrayed this really well. And basically the idea is that any existing disparities will be amplified by ICT, just like any existing positive developments can also be aided by ICT. So we're looking at disparity and development across a broad range of things like education, literacy, gender issues, of course, income and affordability. Languages in Africa are a huge issue because there's just so many languages, and it's not only just the languages of the previous colonizers. It's there's hundreds or more of local languages that are used in pockets and in regions. And then there's issues like access to basic infrastructure, like electricity. So the key, looking at ICT as an amplifier, is to look at addressing disparities first, and then start looking at ICT to amplify those developments. So what can we do? First of all, give up the whole white savior routine, and the build it and they will come. It's just it doesn't matter how good the intentions are. I don't think that those approaches have a place. Look, of course, private and public sectors have roles to play. Corporates are going to provide services if those can afford to pay them. And corporates can also take a long-term view and provide services and infrastructure to marginalized communities with the idea that their purchasing power is going to increase over time. But again, it comes back to who can pay for it. Government services and infrastructure. Government has its obligations and its role to play too. Universal access, which has largely been a no-go, at least here in South Africa. But government does have its role. In my opinion, grassroots and bottom-up movements are the ones to target. That's what we do. I can encourage other people to get involved with this. Get involved with an activist group, community networks, community radio, community TV. I think the real strength of Africa is in its communities. Actually, just like anywhere. And I think that's a challenge for this community, the PPDD community, is to learn how to harness the power and strength that are already existing in communities. Again, this comes back to an asset view of things instead of a deficit view, and figure out how to use ICT to amplify the good things that are already going on. Thanks, and again, I'm sorry I couldn't be with you.